y'all. Sorry I was way in the back. Took me a little while to make the walk in these heels. 4 inches of slowness is basically what I've got going on. I know I'm the last person in a whole long rung of talks, but hopefully y'all are still with me. Are you down to go for another 20 minutes with me? Yes, okay, so I like that. I'm not one of those people that respects quiet. You gotta tell me how I'm doing, all right? So feel free to get a little rowdy and loud with me over the next 20 minutes. So let me confirm, is this my clicker? All right, see if we can get it going. Cool, all right. So my name's Hillary Doe. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I do, but I'm the Vice President of Strategy for a company called Nationbuilder. And this is a phrase that I think about basically every day. Everyone can lead. There are obviously a lot of caveats to this, but this statement is more true today than it's ever been in the history of mankind. Not because human potential is any different, but because the truth is, it's not just about your potential, it's also about your power, your ability to access people, whether that's been historically centralized or today more decentralized, and more of us have access to it, right? So I have some sort of silly slides about that. Used to be, like if you follow leadership theory at all and you're a nerd, like I am, that the original theories of leadership were called the great man theory. This idea that you're born into leadership and you have a crown so you can get people to go to war for you, and that's what leading looks like, basically. Fast forward a while and you get to the Industrial Revolution, and leadership theory turns into this, basically, the corporate kings, the idea that post the Industrial Revolution, leadership and management are basically the same thing. And in order to be a really successful leader, you manage your employees really well, you throw your weight around a little bit, you buy broadcast messaging, you tell consumers what you need them to do. That's how you change the world, basically. Not super inspiring, but real life leadership theory. Enter the internet. And obviously, we all know this, it's a little bit trite, but everything's different, right? And everything is truly different. Enter the internet, and suddenly each of our voices can be a lot louder. Each of us can pull off a lot more things. We see this in social movements that would have never occurred, with nonprofit organizations that would have never had access to capital. Anyone can throw up a page, find donors, build a community of support, move them to action, accomplish incredible things. This is more true than ever before. We see it in political campaigns with unlikely candidates, and we see it in corporations moving their broadcast ad buying messaging to brand ambassadors, to peer-to-peer, to the realization that the crowd has incredible power. More than believing your ad, they believe each other, and peer-to-peer referrals, peer-to-peer donations. This is a new kind of power. It's a new era. And as a leader in this space, you need a different set of skills, right? So I think about this a lot, like I said. Let's see if I can get her to go. And the truth is that despite all of that ability, that potential, the potential that the internet and technology has for us, we still are facing a leadership crisis. So the World Economic Forum named that this leadership crisis is the biggest threat to our global community, that we're facing unprecedented challenges like climate change, rapidly adapting technology that implies rapidly adapting economies, growth in population that has implications, really devastating forms of warfare, inequality on the rise, all of these things that we've never, as a global community, had to tackle all at the same time. And what the World Economic Forum named was that there actually aren't enough leaders stepping up to deal with this stuff. Not enough leaders throwing their hat in the ring to tackle some of our biggest challenges, and not enough diverse voices coming to the table with new ideas. We see a lot of the same leaders actually cycling through the same sectors, getting jobs at different places. And we see the leadership failure rate, the rate by peers of whether or not a leader's made it, really skyrocketing. So technology has this incredible promise. That's the reason I work at a tech company, this promise that everyone can lead, that we can democratize access to power, that we can accomplish incredible things, bring more voices to the table. But so far, without intentionality, it's not been enough. We're facing this crisis together. So I know that we need more leaders, and we need better leaders. I think about it all the time in my job. I work for a leadership company, and we build software to lower the barriers to leadership, basically. We use a lot of big data to try to get at what makes leaders really successful across sectors, what makes folks pop. We build tools to equip those leaders so that they can be maximally successful. We try to make it cheap and easy and available. That's what we're about, right? But in that inquiry, when I'm thinking a lot about how we lower the barriers to leadership, one thing that we have to reckon with is the context in which people lead. Because at the same time as we need more leaders, we have massive leadership gaps for women, for people of color. If you need more leaders, you got to look at the places where folks are stepping up to lead, and that leadership is being systematically suppressed, right? Because if you need more leaders, you got some, and we're not allowing those folks, we're holding them back, right? So I started digging into that. It was a little bit of an obsession, so I'm hoping that you'll go on this little journey with me to talk through some of the ways that this shows up. I was really forced to reflect on my own leadership experience when I figured out this gap situation, when I was like, oh, we got to deal with this. It's not enough to just build tech for folks who know they are leaders. We have to figure out how to close the gaps. So I reflected on my own experience, and the truth is, for me, like a lot of people, my story is probably pretty similar. Leadership was the joy of my life, has been the joy of my life. I was called up when I was really young, I think I was 23 years old, to be the executive director of a nonprofit organization I'd helped to found. And you know, I'd never raised money in my life, and all of a sudden my job was basically to supply these folks, this cool community, it's called the Roosevelt Institute if anyone wants to Google them, of distributed think tanks all over the country with all the resources they need to accomplish incredible stuff, and they were pulling off incredible stuff. So this leadership, this opportunity to represent them, to speak on their behalf, to raise money for them was the joy of my life. That's still my family and my community. And in a lot of ways, that experience was also really shitty. You can laugh. It's weird. It says shitty on a slide. Maybe the first time that word's been on a slide in this room, so we can all just take that in for a minute. But it was, I mean, in some ways kind of awful. I don't think I was equipped at the time as a 23-year-old woman to actually like process and filter through and sort through all the feedback I was getting, what was about me and what wasn't, what was valuable and what wasn't, the amount of people who had things to say about how I looked and how that made them feel, people who told me, donors who said that I shouldn't wear heels because I was kind of tall and it was emasculating, folks who let me, it's real life, folks who let me know that my voice was gonna offend them in some way and tank them, or that I should lean into the fact that I was young and blonde to try and get more donor money, or, I mean, just the list goes on, basically. And at the time, I just took all that really personally. I really was trying to do a good job, so I just, you know, tried to adapt and conform to that. I have a funny example. The first time I did national television, I was on Fox News, and I had a call time an hour and a half before my segment was supposed to start. So I show up, I was like really nervous because it was the first time I'd done national TV, and I was supposed to be representing this policy proposal alongside a bunch of other PhDs from these other think tanks who were a lot older than I was, and I like wanted to, you know, show up and like represent my crew well. So I report an hour and a half early, go to makeup, and I got Foxified. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but basically I brought some pictures. They just ratted my hair. I had like dark eyeshadow on. I was pretty young. I didn't wear a lot of makeup. I had a socially inappropriate amount of blush on. I'll show you. This is one of the pictures. That one's not so bad. Can you see all the blush? I'm not sure if you can see it. But I ended up rolling out of there with this rat. I just didn't look like myself anymore, and I was like a little rattled, and they pushed me up on stage with these 3 other dudes that showed up 15 minutes early, and we all like fought it out about numbers. You know, it was just like a wild experience. That's, you know, I tried to roll with it. I was like, this is what leading looks like, I guess, for me. This is sort of like what I gotta do to be in the system. But it didn't feel great. I just thought you might all want to laugh at those. All right. I mean, I guess to get on a more serious note, it became clear to me how far this had gone, like how personally I'd taken this, when I went to a donor meeting, I'll never forget, trying to ask for support for our summer academy. And the individual I was pitching, you know, I'm in the middle of it. I'm like trying to get him fired up. I have a lot of enthusiasm. I was working it. And right in the middle, he kind of leaned for it, and I'll never forget, he kind of smacked his lips, interrupted me, and said, listen, I'll give you the money, but I'm going to need you to come to my country house with me. Proceeded to proposition me, just a series of inappropriate questions. Like, at the time, things I'd never even heard before. Like, I was just, and the thing that really struck me was while that was happening, I just nodded and smiled and thought, how do I make him feel really comfortable? Because the truth is, I'm a little bit scared and thrown off, not even offended, just kind of shocked and embarrassed. But I still needed that money, right? Like, it felt selfish to do anything different. I had to keep the lights on and pay everybody's salaries, and like, I didn't want him to feel uncomfortable. I wanted him to like maybe still give. How do you make that pivot? And I'm ashamed when I think back on that. Like, I wish I could rewrite history. But the truth is, that's how I showed up. And when I left, I took it really personally. I thought, okay, what about me walking into that room made him behave the way that he behaved? And how do I like change that in the future? And that shouldn't be the cost of leadership for women or anybody else. It should not be the cost of us showing up to lead, to like deal with that and cope with that. And I didn't know how to cope with it. I ended up a couple years later with an eating disorder I had to deal with because I associated my success with my appearance. It was just warped. And so I think we can all agree that should not be the cost of leading for anyone. Yeah? Yes. A little bit of feedback. Yes. All right. Some of us agree, some of us are on the fence. I get it. Cool. Okay. So that experience helped underscore for me as I'm doing all this research and working on the tech side to facilitate leadership, lower barriers to leadership, that doing that effectively, meeting this global challenge, addressing these global challenges we all need to face also means changing the constructs in which we all have to lead. And any of us who have to solve problems with tech know that it's really important to have a clear problem statement. You need to know the truth about what's wrong so that you can solve the problem, right? So when I started digging into these leadership gaps, the thing that I was struck with was that there are just a bunch of myths. There's a bunch of mistruths about why this gap exists, and it makes it impossible to solve the problem until you bust them. For me as an individual, I could have had a good clap back for that man at the time, but there were a bunch of myths. I was not aware of the truth. I didn't know it was systemic. I thought it was personal, right? So it felt useful in this group of futurists and technologists and folks that can change the world is that I'd love for you to meet that global challenge, to address all of those problems we're going to face as a global community. It feels like to start, we need to define the problem space and bust all the myths about why these leadership gaps exist in the first place. I'm going to use the example of women because that's my experience, but this applies to anybody who's underrepresented in leadership, women, people of color, folks that identify as LGBTQ, all kinds of folks who are underrepresented in these communities, and we need more leaders, right? So you guys willing to go on this little journey with me, bust some myths? Yeah. Yes, all right. Here we go. We're going to bust some myths about women, bust some myths about leadership, and flip the frame completely. So we're not just talking about equity, we're talking about the real cost to all of us of suppressing women's leadership, anybody's leadership, right? All right. So the first one, I did this in content analysis of a bunch of work around why the leadership gap exists, and a bunch of articles written about the pay gap, the leadership gap, equity in America, gender equity, and this is one of the most common myths that you'll see everywhere. It's basically ubiquitous. This idea that women hold themselves back. One of the ways it's written is that the leadership gap exists because of the choices women make, or sometimes it's written as our lack of ambition. That sounds like I tried to pump up the slide, but that's real life that shows up. So I think we should all just bust it. Just bust it right now and talk truth for a second. So one of the ways that this shows up is that the Women's Policy Research, I don't know if you guys know these folks, Institute for Women's Policy Research, I'm on the board, so I thought I should plug them. They're awesome. And this is truth. Women make up half the workforce, head half of all households with children, as sole breadwinners, get more degrees, and make less than men in every career where there's enough data to evaluate it. So what does that mean? It means it's not about choices. It's not about the idea that women choose lower paying fields, right? If you make less than men in every category, in every job where there's enough data to evaluate it, there's something systemic going on. There's a problem to solve for all of us technologists, right? It also means that we should probably all look at the word choose, that's the word there, and take some issue with the word choice if we're going to define the problem space, because it comes up everywhere, that women are just choosing lower paying fields. If you look at it, I don't know, I guess that's just the problem. Maybe that's why we have this leadership gap and this pay gap. But we got to take some issue with the word choose, because women are not choosing in a vacuum. It's not like we all woke up and we were like, you know, gosh, we don't need any money. We just want to do something that makes us feel good. I mean, like, that's not what's going on. Like, the truth is that women bear an undue burden for childcare and household responsibilities, right? And that we've made decisions, at least in this country with our social policy, to not provide for your affordable childcare or health care of any kind, and that we don't have paid maternity leave. There's a lot going on, and so you end up in part-time jobs with flexible schedules that pay you less and don't give you benefits, and that doesn't sound like a choice to me. All right. Yes or no? Yays? Thumbs? Okay. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so let's take some issue with the word choose, and when you see that, when it shows up, even in like subtle ways from well-intentioned, well-meaning folks, we gotta bust it and reject it, because this is not the problem space, it's mythic. It's like obscuring the reality, the way to truth, you know? Okay, some more examples. And in case you need a little bit more proof that this is showing up, you'll read a lot of articles about we need to focus on training. We can't, even though that might be really helpful for some folks, for some individuals, we just cannot educate ourselves out of the leadership gap. Not the pay gap or the leadership gap. The truth is that as the education required for a position increases, the gap increases, the pay gap and the underrepresentation of women. The truth is that women have more degrees, and that women are entering fields like business, for example, at really high rates, and we've still got 4 S&P CEOs, down 1 from last year. Only 20% of senior managers, even though the preponderance of middle managers are women. 1 in 5 seats in Congress, only 6 governors, 17% of corporate boards, only 3% are women of color. There's something real going on here we can't educate ourselves out of. The next little bit place that this shows up is how common is workplace discrimination anyway. Folks try to like downplay that. The Me Too movement is an example of people leveraging technology to bust through that and really do some rapid culture shifting work. But we need to consider the legal frameworks as well that exist to continue this. Forced arbitration clauses, things that divide people, that separate the collective, for example. So these are just ways that it shows up. I have some fun examples that I read through to show y'all. This is a study that was published in HBR about women attorneys, and basically names that attorneys declined to interview women because they saw them as a flight risk. They thought they might be helicopter moms. They didn't really need the job, that kind of thing. Of course, none of that is the choice of the female applicant. So another example of busting that myth. And then just to get sassy, here's one from the end of, about a year and a half ago, the end of 2016. Pretty much speaks for itself. Women must earn less than men because they're weaker, smaller, less intelligent. They must earn less, that is all. There's not much to say, I think, about that one, yeah? All right, cool. I'm just gonna let that hang out for a second. Okay, the second myth that I wanted to bust with y'all today so we can get to the problem statement is that women don't look like leaders should. Of course, nobody says this explicitly, but it shows up in all kinds of ways, more subtly. One way is that we say the best leaders have a certain, je ne sais quoi, an it factor. We're looking for that when we're hiring folks. Let's dig into that a little bit. So I dug through rubrics that boards use to select their corporate CEOs, and also looked at elections with swing voters to see what sent voters one way or another about candidates, to try and dig into what these qualities are that folks are looking for in leaders, and if they have anything to do with the reality of how well someone can lead and get to desired outcomes, right? These are some of the things people said. Folks are looking for charisma and presence. Even when you're hiring CEOs, that's what you're looking for. If you dig into the more specific things that people say around this, it seems to actually, this is crazy, but it seems to actually approximate like wingspan. You're actually looking for the physical space that a human takes up as a proxy for charisma, as if wingspan has something to do with meeting your quotas, but like it seems like maybe that's true, according to the rubrics. The next one is risk-taking, which actually has an inverse relationship to success if you're taking risks for risk's sake, which we probably all know. And the third one is this it factor, and truly, truly I dug and tried to find some commonality. I am a data nerd. And the truth is, this just seems to be a proxy for choosing whoever you want, and very, very common reason why you hire the person that you hire at the highest level. The most common one, though, and the most predictive of who a board might choose among a slate of candidates is somebody that looks most like them. So we talked earlier about the fact that 17% of board seats are held by women, so most boards are just like really heavily male. And no shade, guys. I'm all about guys. But the truth is, this doesn't help lower the gap, right, or close the gap, that we have this just like predisposition. We're gonna have to do some work to uncouple our biases and close the gap together. So we do know things, though, and this is like partly my business, about what makes leaders really successful. So we don't need all of that bunk. We don't need the myth, right? There's real facts about what helps leaders in any sector blow up. And the truth is that leaders today, in this new era where the crowd has power and control, don't just need to be basically broadcast message humans who manage down in their hierarchical institution. They need to be facilitative. They need to figure out how to recruit new folks in a new generation in a way that's facilitative. They need to be great listeners. Listening is like the new power skill. If you can listen to what people are saying about your product, about you in the world, pick up on that and adapt really quickly, those leaders make incredible strides. Folks that distribute leadership, there's an exact correlation, basically, between folks who have more leaders involved in running their institutions and the success of that institution. So think about this broadly. I'm not just talking about employees. I'm talking about folks that realize giving their people, their supporters, the ability to fundraise for them will help them. Giving folks the ability to organize for them will help them. Brand ambassadors instead of commercials will help them. All of these examples. For example, Macron, who just, the French president, ran on Nationbuilder. This incredibly distributed organization that popped up basically overnight and then ran his entire slate, like 500 plus candidates, for a government. He raised a government by distributing leadership, basically, really broadly, really quickly. And we've seen that be really effective. And the truth is, when you look at this list of skills, because of the social and societal constructs that we're all operating within, the truth is that, like it or not, women index high on a lot of these. We have to figure out how to be good listeners. We've been asked to be really adaptable. If you look at the characteristics of women in leadership studies, they just tend to index in this direction. So if you're gonna pick someone based on the way they look, and I wouldn't, maybe like not pick someone that looks just like you and instead think about the people who have these kind of characteristics. We need to lift them up. We need to figure out with technology how to scale these kind of skills, how to validate these kind of leaders and put them in positions of power. Okay, last one. Are you guys still with me? Sweet. Okay, last one. It's a zero-sum game. This is ubiquitous. Even among super well-intentioned activists who are fighting for things like equal pay, we take the bait on this bad boy. This idea that when women do better, they do it at the expense of each other or at the expense of men. And it's just not true. But for example, people around the pay gap will say, well, if you give a woman an extra $1, that takes $1 away from a man. That doesn't help anybody. That comes up all the time. And even well-intentioned activists will say, yeah, but it's about equity. You should still get paid for the work that you do. That's true, I believe in equity. But it accepts this premise, which is complete bunk. Complete bunk. So let's talk about an example of that. This is a quote from a man, I won't say much more about him, who is kind of leaning into this. He, of course, was not as subtle as a lot of people, so it helps. But he says, if businesses are forced to pay women the same as men, they'll have to reduce pay for the men they employ, simple economics. The men as primary breadwinners will have an even more difficult time. Having more women in the workforce could create competition for jobs, even men's jobs. It's bad for family and society. Again, this is an egregious example, so like maybe take it with a grain of salt, but it's helpful to highlight the undertones and like the things that we accept and believe at some level in more subtle speech. So I'm just going to break it down for a hot second. Just a fun fact reminder, this breadwinner thing is like not real. Women work in 50% of households and had 80% of single family households. So if anybody's locking that down, I think it's the fairer sex. But more importantly, this simple economics idea. This isn't simple economics. I mean, it's simple economics if the economy is like my wallet with my $10 and I give them to you all and it takes one away, you know what I mean? But that's not how economies work, right? We pay women more, they buy more things. Actually, women actually invest more in their families and communities and education. We invest in women and their ideas. We give them venture capital. They build businesses and industries we could have never imagined. This isn't how economies work. It's not simple economics. So we shouldn't accept this premise, right? We can lean into something else that's a little bit more true, define a different problem space. And here's some facts for us to take out of the room the next time you hear these arguments. Fact. Equal pay for women, estimated to add, not just replace existing pay, but add $512 billion to the US economy. Not chump change. But the first time I read it, I was like, this is a really big number. I don't really know what that means. I mean, I need some context, right? So I put some context together for you. This is intended to be politically agnostic, so if you don't agree with my ideas, just spend the money on something else. But to give you a sense, context, what does $512 billion pay for? It could pay for universal pre-K for every child in America, universal access to free college tuition, 1 year paid maternity benefits for working moms, just like for example. And if this doesn't get you going, I also put it in a pie chart, because you might like that better. That usually gets laughs, no? Okay. Universal pre-K, access to tuition, year of paid leave for working moms. I threw in a year for dads too, because that seems important. And all of this adds up to less than 33% of $512 billion, which is the average tax rate, state and federal taxes. So we could pay for it if we wanted. Just fun facts. The next time someone's like, 80 cents on the dollar, not a big deal. Cool? Do you feel like equipped with that? Yeah, I got one little woo. I'm into it. All right, you guys are still fired up. Okay. So if this is the real problem space, here's another one for you to take home with you. Equal pay expected to lift half of poor women and their families out of poverty. The implications of that actually can't even be measured effectively for kids to grow up outside of poverty. So it's not true. Women do better to the benefit of everyone. Anybody who does better to the benefit of everyone. The truth is that we need more leaders, we need better leaders, we need more diverse voices, more ideas. So getting those folks at the table is better for all of us to solve these global challenges that we're not solving right now, that the World Economic Forum says is the biggest challenge facing our global community that we need to figure out how to solve. So I started doing this work, and this is my son, just like a plug. He's 2.5 now. I think he picked me a flower. So that's what's going on there. When I started doing this research in the last year and a half, everyone, my friends, whatever, excited. My mom's friends were excited. But a couple of them, actually like 5 or 6, said to me, yeah, I know you're saying that, it's really important for women to lead, and I totally agree with that. And you're saying that they're uniquely equipped to lead in this era and this moment. That makes sense. But I mean, Jet, your son, he's going to be a great leader. He's going to be great too. So it's not like women are uniquely equipped, like he's not. It was just this concern that they were expressing to me, which is just a reflection of this zero-sum game idea. This worry that I was somehow selling him out or undermining or threatening his future by arguing for the importance, the urgency that more people come to the table. He is going to be all right, y'all. I'm not worried about him. He was born into relative privilege. He's funny. He's pretty cute. He'll be fine. I'm not worried. He'll get to lead whatever he wants. But the truth is, he deserves, I'm doing this for him. He deserves a future that's co-created by women and people of color and folks who are going to create things we couldn't have imagined. He's going to have to address all these global challenges that I named. He's going to be the one that inherits that climate change problem, for example. And, God forbid, we don't have the right people at the table showing up for that. He deserves to live in this place that's being led powerfully. That's what this is about for me. So the real risk is missing out on the leadership of women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, because those are some very large underrepresented groups, all underrepresented communities. The real risk is us not solving this problem of needing more leaders and better leaders. It's imperative, it's urgent. So I guess the question that I have for you all is, what are the solutions? We've defined the problem space, we've busted the myths, we've got all the junk out of the way, so we can look at the fact that this is real, it's occurring, it's a real problem. You can't write it off on any of these other things. What can you do now that we have an idea of, what is required to embolden, empower, and unlock the human potential required to tackle these unprecedented challenges? That's my call to action, my CTA to y'all. And once we reject these myths and uncover the truth, we know something about who can lead. We know something about what good leaders look like. We know something about what makes leaders effective. And tech has this potential, this power that we talked at the top to be the great democratizer. What can we do? What can we build and make together and insist on to meet the future? I want to do that with you guys in the next couple days. Cool? All right, thank you guys.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break and then resume back at 11:30 for a panel. And the Women in Tech is taking place in the pavilion right now. Thank you.